Well, hey folks, it's your old pal King Waspinator. Welcome back to Total Party Skills. Be sure to hit like and subscribe. I figured be nice and throw y'all a little red meat and actually do a D&D video. Specifically going to be talking about an old AD&D adventure module called Ninja Wars. This is my first actual encounter with the Kara-Tur subsetting of Forgotten Realms. Back when I was into D&D, didn't really see any of those books out on the shelves. I believe the controversy about, Oriental adventures had already erupted by that point, by the time I had gotten into gaming. That probably explains part of it. I do remember back in high school, I had at least one friend who had a copy of Oriental Adventures because I have a clear memory of thumbing through an old battered copy of it, and it was just like the generic template book. This isn't really describing a setting. It's just giving you, martial arts weapons and some variant character classes, so you can play a samurai or a ninja that you're not just building out of a generic fighter or thief or that kind of thing. But it was just kind of like this obscure relic that no one at the time I was into gaming was even really interested in playing or talking about. It didn't seem to have much of a following. And yet, though, it's part of the Forgotten Realms setting, and it is mentioned, and it probably gets its most nods. The times I've encountered it the most in the D&D books I've read have largely been in like Planescape and Spelljammer, since both of those settings will occasionally reference the rather wide array of East Asian styled themed and gods that used to also be in the D&D setting but are now absent from modern 5th edition depictions. Now, since I'm a book snob, this is like the only print Kara-Tur anything I could find on DriveThruRPG that I'm currently aware of. As far as an adventure module goes, I'd give it a solid B plus. It's basically just an Akira Kurosawa movie, not a Seven Samurai or a Ran or something like that. It's more your Yojimbo and Sanjuro kind of story. The basic premise is, you got this small city that's near a sacred shrine, and every year, there's a big pilgrimage. People come up and go up to visit this shrine of Bishamon. And, the nobles who've been placed in control of the city, they've been switched out a lot, and the current ones, constantly fretting over keeping his position, is if anything goes wrong with one of the seasonal pilgrimages, it could be the end of his career. And seeing that this is so very heavily based on a cinematic concept of what medieval Japan was, him losing his position also likely means he loses his head. So he doesn't want that to happen. So player characters are probably, their angle is they're likely to be employed by him to help just make sure that the festival is secure. Obviously, there's some other powerful people in town who would like to see themselves on the throne of the daimyo. And basically, you don't get to Ninja Wars unless a couple different clans of ninja have been brought in. And much like a Yojimbo kind of way, player characters can very much kind of bounce around the town and play both sides against each other. It has like a lot of side adventure material, tons of NPCs, moderately well mapped out city. Doesn't tell you much about the greater setting that it's in. But the thing that I notice about it is I'm not really sure if you can really say it's racist, but it is really fucking lazy. Most D&D adventures are all kind of based on something. All the games I write are conceptually just kind of lifted off of a bunch of classic B-movie and Pulp Fiction tropes. So on that end, I'm not knocking it on that. What I mean in lazy is just that it's in Forgotten Realms. It's just, relatively speaking, spitting distance away from Faerun and all the stuff that goes on there. And yet, from what it's depicted in here and what I then afterwards, after reading through this, kind of looked around online a bit, kind of look at characters, maps, and what other kind of just some little just general tidbits about it, just to kind of get a sense of things. And it's so directly analogous to medieval Japan and the mainland of Kara-Tur being mainland China that why is it even set in Forgotten Realms? You're nothing but humans. You're all very Japanese culture, Japanese style, Japanese everything. There's no other D&D isms in it. I mean, you're mostly fighting human opponents. There's like maybe a little mention of stuff like Tengu and a few other things from Japanese myth, but there's none of the weird, unique things that come with D&D. They didn't put beholders in there. No Eastern style dragons, no Western style dragons. They have no ninja elves, no place for dwarves. It just kind of just stands out. Like if it was just in and of itself just a purely Japanese inspired setting that stood on its own, it'd be fine. But the fact that it's like wedded into Forgotten Realms and then is just so like, you have this fantasy land that has a lot that's lifted out of Western Europe in terms of fantasy tropes, but also has all these other weird and modern things that have been intruded into it too. And also remixed a bit, so it doesn't seem quite so ethnically homogenous in Faerun as it could be if it were based on a more literal interpretation of medieval or Dark Ages Europe. But, you travel past Stayaways, and then you get into the Kara-Tur section of the continent, and suddenly it is just Asia. Like, just a renamed China and a renamed Japan. Even the map, that part of the continent is like way more on the nose about just recreating Asia's map. Mainland Asia, the Kara-Tur, you know how like there's a part, where kind of China's coast curves away and, from the Japan islands, and then before it gets down to like the large peninsula that, Vietnam and Laos and all those places sit on. Well, in this one, that belly of the continental mainland coastline is kind of more swollen and lower down, and the Japans are smaller, but they have roughly the same shape and the way they're kind of like linked off of things. I don't know, I haven't noticed that there's really much of an analog for Korea in that mix, or if they really do much with, the old Khmer or Thailand or any Siam, any of that. I'm not sure if any of that's covered, but from the maps I was looking at, it's certainly trying to recreate the classic 5 kingdoms of Zhonghu and, ancient Nippon. And as I said, if that was just like floating in and of itself, like here's just a, Asian flavored Kung Fu D&D, fine. But it just stands out to me in a weird way. Even Al-Qadim did more to kind of mix things up and make it still like feel like it's set in the same kind of D&D world with all these different races running around and trying to justify like having elves and dwarves and gnomes and all your classic D&D races in this Arabic styled setting, but they didn't seem to do that with this. And so on that grounds, that's why I don't give it an A, and we'll say that no, I don't think it's lazy. It's like Kill Bill, from Quentin Tarantino. It's a love letter to samurai movies. Like I said, it's very much an Akira Kurosawa Yojimbo kind of story. And if that's your thing, it's a great, like I said, it's a great module. It's got tons of little side adventures. You could spin a whole campaign off around it. You don't even like need to find the Oriental Adventures books, so you have character classes, so someone could play a ninja or a samurai or whatever. You can just take a fighter or a thief or a cleric or whatever it is and just rename it a little bit and just make your choices in character equipment and, their just overall presentation to convey the idea that you're more than just your average fighter, you're a samurai. I mean, a samurai is functionally the same as a knight anyway. I mean, they might have some differences in their honor code, and Western knights were more about using like lance type tactics on horses, whereas samurai were still doing that step lander thing of using your horse to be a mobile platform to use a bow and arrow off of. It's kind of the difference between siege warfare in the East versus, tactical battle unit warfare that was practiced in the West. You need a lance to smash through a line of men, whereas if you're trying to besiege a castle, having your troops on little tiny fast things that can ride around it in circles while they're shooting up, that's great. Other than that, though, functionally, like, aside from a few stylistic things and the things that just kind of come along with, you know, being different religions and having different language groups that, you know, the people are speaking, they still serve the same function within society. So you could just take a knight template, scratch out knight, write down samurai, and bam, you have a samurai character you can play in Ninja Wars. And as for ninjas themselves, thieves/rogues. The end. I mean, there's just two clans of trained paid assassins. You know, you could take off like most of the Japanese terms from this adventure and its setting and turn it into something that would seem pretty much just like any generic classic fantasy world. I mean, like I said, the adventure itself is perfectly functional. As just as my gateway into actually really like getting a chance to read some of what the Kara-Tur setting is like. Lazy. You know, it's kind of the same kind of thing of, you see it in Marvel, where, you know, like, they have white superheroes, they got black superheroes, they got Hispanic superheroes, and they can get their powers from all sorts of different kinds of ways. You know, personal drive, they've experimented on themselves, they got some sort of unique tech. All this stuff has been shown for almost everybody. But yet, like 90% of the fucking time, if the superhero is Asian, for some reason, his superpower gets to be Kung Fu. Perhaps one might think that the reasoning is they're just trying to bring in over what the established superhero archetypes for that culture is, and then mixing it in to their superheroes. But like, if that was the reasoning, then like most of the Marvel superheroes would all have gotten their powers from God, or because their dad was Zeus or some shit like that. If all that was being lifted as much off of Western tropes as that's lifted off the other, I don't know. Like I said, appreciating someone else's culture, trying to pay homage to a great movie maker's movies. There's no harm in that. But fuck, it's goddamn lazy. They should have at least tried to put some fucking Japanese elves in this shit. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, stay waspinated.